And by the way, Bible writers place heavy emphasis on structures. And because we in the West don't really use structures, I mean, maybe in the sermon you have 3 points and altar call at the end, but we don't really think about structures of how do we say things as much as Semitic people do. And they sometimes even speak like that because they're used, it's like in them, it's part of their language, it's the way they express themselves. And this is why it's kind of important to know how to do it and to teach people how to do it. Everybody in your church members should know how to see structures because they're there, and most of the time they're pretty easy to see. There are some books that are more difficult than others. Some are kind of unclear, and if you here's a quick side note: if you don't see the structure, don't force it on there. It's always possible that there is no structure. It's very unlikely, but there are a few places where it's probably there's no structure. But most of the time there will be something, and the more you study it and the more you see it, you will see it. And then you will see the heart where chapter 2, you should use chapter 2 when you preach about prayer. That's the main point, right? That's the heart of the story, is the prayer, the connection. Like, for example, that C-section that we had there. When we have Chaldeans, they say, humanly speaking, is impossible. Daniel says, humanly speaking, is impossible. Then they say, well, there are gods in heaven, they know it, but that's it. We have no contact with them. Daniel, on the other hand, he knows there is God in heaven, he's able to do it, and therefore Daniel is able to do it. Though it's humanly impossible, Daniel can do it. Why? Because there is God who can do it, and Daniel has connection to that God. And why? Because of the heart of the story, the prayer. So yeah, the verses 17 through 23 are really the center of the chapter. And again, it's not surprising, since this is the scene where the turning point of the chapter happens. Here the secret is revealed as a result of a prayer of Daniel and his friends. And it leads to break forth into the praise of, that's another thing. When you look at the text in verses 20 to 23, that depending on what kind of Bible you have, but a lot of English translations, they will put it not in a paragraph form, because this is poetry. And so when Daniel receives the blessing of the knowledge, he creates a poem, or he recites a poem, or he sings, maybe it's a song, right? But it's very poetic. And poetry is beautiful structures, by the way, in Hebrew. So if you want to see structures, you can just look at that poetic text. But that's another highlight. We have poetry in the heart of the story. It's all narrative, and suddenly, verses 20 through 23, we have this beautiful poem, which is the heart of the story. Okay, let's look at one more thing about this story, which is also interesting. When you're thinking about Daniel chapter 2, we already saw that the center of the story is the prayer. That's the turning point. That's where everything leads to, is to that prayer and to that connection and to that beautiful poetic text about who God is. But what is the main question when we are looking at Daniel chapter 2 and we are thinking about this story, besides the fact that he has a dream, and then that dream is interpreted, and we know it's about his story, and Daniel kind of tells us that, and God reveals it to him. There are some repetitions. As you're reading through this, and I already emphasized to you last time that repetitions are important. Did you notice some words that repeat a lot in this chapter? What are some of those most repeated words in chapter 2?
I would guess kingdom.
Kingdom is repeated a lot, yes. Kingdom.
Dream.
Huh?
Dream.
Interpretation
Dream.
and revealing. Interpretation and revealing.
Yeah, so we have to interpret a dream that is about kingdoms. Yes. What else?
We say God.
God is repeated.
Mystery.
Mystery. Very good. Those are all very important points, and they all lead you to kind of the theme and highlights of this chapter. I'll tell you one more. There is a huge repetition that you'll see throughout, and it's a repetition of the word, very important, time. There are times, and there is time that we see from the point of view of Nebuchadnezzar, and there is a time that we see from the point of view of God. And besides the word time, there is also a repetition of the word matter. Now, unfortunately, in English translations, this word is not always translated the same way. So when Nebuchadnezzar is using these words, English translation use one word, and then when God is using this word, unfortunately, English translation usually don't use the same word. But if you look at Aramaic, that word is used in verse 5, verse 8, 9, 10, 11, 15, 17, and 23. Matter, some matter, something about something. And we have two matters in this chapter. We have matter of Nebuchadnezzar concerning the wise man, and then we have a matter of God concerning Nebuchadnezzar. Again, this comes out also out of the structure. So we have repetition, we have a structure, right? And so this is a story about time and matter. Matter of Nebuchadnezzar and time of Nebuchadnezzar. The time that Nebuchadnezzar assigns to the wise men, and then the matter of God concerning Nebuchadnezzar, and the time that God assigns to the world. And if you're looking
are you
through
saying
this,
more like, excuse me, are you saying more like relationship? Oh, I had a different word. Dealings with and relationship. Because when you say matter, I was thinking of like rocks and tables and material stuff. You know what I'm saying? And not like interrelationship, you know. Sorry to
yeah, so no. That's, if you don't understand something, feel free. Or even if you have some ideas, feel free. By the way, Laurency, right now I see you have your hand up. You can always speak up, because sometimes I'm looking at my Bible, and if I don't look at you, I don't see your hand. Yeah, so we can look at some of these words matter, so you know. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "The word for me is firm, if you do not make known to me." So here, the translations use the word word. So the word or the matter from me is firm. My decision, right? Whatever I decided about you is firm. That's one example of how English translations are translating the word. In verse 8, it's again, they translate it as word. The king answered and said, "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time," again the word time, "because you see that the word from me is firm," right? The word or the idea or the matter that I decided, not physical necessarily, right? So we have these words time and matter, or time and word, side by side, next to each other. Verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the matter. See, now the English translation changed the translation, and now they use the word matter, but it's the same word. in Aramaic. They could use words. So then Daniel went to his house and made a word known to Hananiah, right? So you can use the word or the word matter. Let's see, verse 23, for example. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Okay? So that's the context of that word that is repeated. Laurencio?
12 years ago, Dr. Richard Davidson introduced me to the structures, especially to the chiastic structure. And I was completely overwhelmed, and I was so happy. I was looking for it in the Bible, and I continued to study it. Then I found out that people find structures everywhere. If I take a chapter from the Bible, and if I change things around, if I take one verse from the beginning, put it at the end, and change them, switch them, and give them to a theologian who loves structure, he'll come up with a structure anyway. It doesn't matter how many times I switch the verses around. And unfortunately, I kind of lost that zeal, that passion for structure. I know it is important, but I'm afraid sometimes, and I think you alluded to that a few minutes ago, sometimes we come up with a structure where the Bible doesn't provide one. And my question is it possible for any one of us to misinterpret the passage just because we take a look at the structure and we are overwhelmed by it, or we look at the center of it and we come up with our own ideas about the passage, and then we skip some steps in the process of exegesis just because we have a specific structure in mind, and therefore this must be the conclusion based on the structure that I could come up with. Is that possible?
Yes, it is possible, and this is possible with any steps of exegesis. As you're working on your exegesis, you can do this with your translation, for example. I teach Hebrew, and I used to teach Greek also at the seminary, then I had too much, so I stopped, and I teach only Hebrew. But sometimes, I am worried about the results, because after 1 year of Hebrew, sometimes students think that now they are professionals and they are pros in Hebrew, and then they do their own translations, which are not always correct. So you can do that with Hebrew, you can do that with Greek, you can come up with connections and connect. I've heard some weird sermons where they used Hebrew, and they say, well, the root of this word is connected to this and that, and now you have Pope there suddenly, right? When it's not really there. You can do it. You can do this with structures. You can do this with any part of exegesis. The most important part of exegesis is prayer, and the second most important part of exegesis is reading. Just read the text. When you're working on the structures, you really have to be sensitive to the text and be honest with the text, not try to come up with a structure. And I know that there's a temptation of seeing chiasms everywhere. They're not chiasms everywhere. They also like parallels, and they like different kinds of parallels. And also be able to say, I don't know. That's sometimes one of the toughest things, because we as theologians or pastors, if you're a pastor, you are forced to preach on Sabbath. And now sometimes you're working on your sermon during the week and Friday night comes, and you really need to finish your sermon, and you are forced to come up with some structure. Just be able to say, I don't know the structure. And that's it. And if it is not there, it's not there. But if you are sensitive to it, you will see there. And a lot of times it is clear. Like this one that we just did. Do you guys have any questions about it? That was pretty obvious, right? Wasn't it? Once you start looking at step by step. And what I would do is start with those structures that really stand out, that are obvious, and try to make them, see them on your own. Don't go to, for example, Zechariah. Zechariah is extremely difficult, and some chapters are debated. I actually wrote my dissertation on Zechariah, and there are some chapters that I don't even think that there is structure, and there maybe is structure, but I'm not going to say that there is one because I don't see there. And so what the point that you're making is, it's very good, but it applies to every single step, not just structures.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Is it possible to have two different structures from the same passage or the same book?
Yes. And sometimes there are two different structures. So yes and no. It depends. It's actually very good. I'm not against using commentaries, but I'm against using commentaries as a first step. So to me, the approach should be step number one, you work with the text without commentaries. Don't use anything. You come up with your sermon or your paper. But commentaries are a good step because they're kind of like a check between you and the final product. And once you go to a commentary and look at their structures, and maybe they'll show you that you're totally off. And then be able to humbly say, okay, I was wrong, and what I saw there is not really there. Or maybe you'll see that they are wrong. But there are few places where you have various structures within one structure, and Daniel is one of those where we'll see this later on, where he is using two different structures simultaneously. And there are structures within structures. The entire book of Daniel has a structure. The entire book of Daniel is chiasm, and then each chapter is a chiasm, and then within those chiasms, you have little parallels. And so yes, I mean, it's not common that you would have two different views, but it's possible. There are a few instances that I could show you where that is the case.
That is my real struggle, because anytime you study a passage and you go through different commentaries, or if you study a book, you'll find that theologians, they come up with all kinds of structures. For example, even in the commentary written by Franko Stefanovic, The Revelation of Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation, you find in his commentary 3 different structures of the book of Revelation, and all of them are amazing. They're written very, very nice, in a very organized manner, and you wonder which one did John have in mind when he wrote his book. So
yeah,
challenging.
Yeah. Yes. And do we have to pick one? That's my question. And it's not just with structures. I mentioned translations. You can have the same issue with translations. You have a word, and you have very good, one commentary is going to give you very good reasons why that word should be translated in a certain way. And then you have another commentary, he'll come along and says, no, it should be translated in a different way. And then you have another third one, and you have 3 options. They all fit the text, and they're all very good. And which one is correct? And do we have to pick
Professor.
one? Yeah.
And I think this is the beauty of the Hebrew, because at the same point,
And Greek, by the way, too.
Yeah, he wants to give you like a specific message, but it uses like broad words that in my understanding, people can understand according to what God is trying to speak with them, Sometimes God speaks to you in a way, and sometimes speak to me in another way, and both are revelation from God at the same source. So I think we got from the same source different things,
Yeah. Well, Laurency, we'll come back to this because I see we are out of time and we didn't finish the story of the time. So we'll come back to that as well. But this was a great question. I'll finish with this thing. I personally would never preach or write a paper on a structure that I do not clearly see from the text, that I did not come up with, that I'm just seeing that somebody else sees. So unless you can clearly see it after praying and reading the text, and then if somebody confirms it for you, that you see it in some commentary, that's awesome. That person just shows you that he saw it too, that you're not the only one. But you should be the first one to see it. I don't go to commentaries and say, okay, this is the structure because Dukan said so. I value Dukan very much. I studied with him, great person, but I still want to do the job first. And if I don't see it there, it's beautiful, but until you see it, don't use it. But we'll practice these structures more and more. Davidson loves structures, so if you say that you worked with Davidson on that first, I know he has a huge passion for structures. And structures on their own are not theology. Structures help you. So you have several exegetical tools, and they all should connect. If you use 3 different exegetical tools and they tell you one thing, and then you come up with a structure, and structure seems to take you other way, then don't just go with the structure. That's another very important thing. You don't just take structure and say, wow, the structure is amazing, and then throw away the translation and all the other steps that you need to do, and your sentence structure and other things, right? So anyway, we'll work on it. I have another class, so I have to go. But we'll come back to that question. That's a great point. And we'll come back to the issue of time, which you can look at the time and the matter on chapter 2.
Professor,
All right, guys.
question, like
Yes.
10-second question about the time, but about the time of this class. So you're going to stay the same next week?
Yes, it seems like the most people can make it. I was willing to move it to Wednesday. Unfortunately, I cannot do it later on Thursdays because I have classes until late. But I could move it to Wednesday or Tuesday.
I'm not
but most people
complaining. I
prefer
think for
this.
most, this is the best time. I just want to put it in the agenda.
I will be happy with this
So-
move because each time I start driving to work, I'm at work right now.
Okay.
That's it.